Let's deep dive into a mind-blowing YouTube podcast created by artificial intelligence, where you will hear conversations by two AI agents in a way you've never imagined before. This isn't just a podcast, it's a journey into the future, crafted by AI, designed for you. Ready to have your mind blown? Let's begin.
Welcome to our deep dive into On the Origin of Species.
Oh, yeah. One of the most influential books in scientific history.
It really shook things up, huh?
Back in 1859, when Charles Darwin first published it.
His ideas still resonate today, don't they?
They really do.
So get ready for a journey through Darwin's mind as we unpack his groundbreaking theory of evolution by natural selection. We've got Galapagos finches, extinct giant armadillos.
A whole lot more to explore.
Yeah, what's fascinating about Darwin's work is that it wasn't just some wild idea out of the blue.
Right.
He meticulously built his case over decades, drawing on a wealth of observations and evidence.
Exactly. He was a very, very thorough scientist.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Darwin's most famous idea is natural selection.
Yes.
It sounds simple at first.
That's right.
Creatures with traits that give them an edge in their environment are more likely to survive and pass those traits on to their offspring.
Right.
But how did he actually figure this out?
Well, one of his key insights came from studying finches in the Galapagos Islands.
Ah, the famous finches.
Yes. He noticed that finches on different islands had distinct beak shapes,
Really?
perfectly suited to the food sources on their respective islands.
So it's like each island had its own customized finch beak.
Yeah, you could say that.
But were these differences really that important for survival?
Absolutely. Darwin observed how, during a drought, finches with larger beaks
Okay.
that could crack open tough seeds were more likely to survive,
All right.
while those with smaller beaks struggled.
Makes sense.
This showed that even subtle variations in traits could make the difference between life and death, driving the evolution of a species over time.
Wow, so he's seeing this in action.
Yeah.
That makes sense. But Darwin didn't stop at birds, did he?
Oh, no.
What other examples did he use to build his case?
Well, he spent years studying barnacles,
Barnacles.
which may seem like pretty boring creatures at first glance.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But Darwin discovered an incredible amount of variation in their shapes, sizes, and feeding mechanisms.
Wow.
This showed that variation exists even in seemingly simple organisms and is essential for natural selection to work.
So if all the finches had the same beak, or all the barnacles were identical,
Right.
a bad season could wipe them all out.
Exactly.
So this variation is like nature's insurance policy.
Precisely. Darwin also pointed out that organisms produce way more offspring
Okay.
than can possibly survive. This leads to what he called the struggle for existence, where individuals compete for limited resources.
That sounds pretty harsh.
It does, but that's just the reality of nature.
But I guess that competition is what drives those with advantageous traits to succeed
Yes.
and pass those traits on, shaping the species over generations.
Exactly.
Did Darwin see this struggle as cruel or wasteful?
Not at all. He recognized it as a fundamental force in nature, shaping the diversity and resilience of life.
So it's not about being cruel, it's just this is how it works.
Right. Understanding this struggle isn't about glorifying competition. It's about recognizing the importance of balance and adaptation in ecosystems.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So this brings us to descent with modification.
Yes.
It's the idea that species change over time with traits passed down and modified through generations. Darwin used a rather interesting example to illustrate this.
Oh, yeah.
Pigeon breeding.
Pigeon breeding, exactly.
Yeah, why pigeons?
Well, pigeon fanciers were essentially speeding up evolution by selectively breeding birds with desirable traits, like specific feather patterns or body shapes.
So they're sort of tinkering with it.
Yes, this was like a microcosm of natural selection, showcasing the power of selective pressure to shape organisms over time.
So it's like humans were playing the role of the environment, choosing which traits got passed on.
Yes, in a way.
But did Darwin see any limitations in using artificial selection as a model for natural processes?
Well, he acknowledged that artificial selection was driven by human preferences.
Yeah, we like what we like.
Whereas natural selection was driven by the relentless pressure to survive and reproduce.
That's a little more serious.
A bit more serious, yes.
Yeah,
But the basic principle of selecting for advantageous traits was the same.
right.
And seeing how much change humans could achieve in pigeons over a few generations made him realize the potential for vast transformations in nature over millions of years.
So we're speeding it up.
Exactly.
But nature has a lot more time.
That's right.
Speaking of vast transformations, How did Darwin explain the incredible diversity of life on Earth, everything from bacteria to elephants?
Well, this is where his revolutionary idea of the tree of life comes in.
Okay, the tree of life.
He envisioned all species connected through a vast branching tree with common ancestors at the base and modern species at the tips.
So are all connected.
We are all part of this grand tree of life.
That's a powerful image. But how did he support such a bold idea?
He drew upon a wide range of evidence. For example, he looked at fossils,
Fossils.
which provide snapshots of ancient life showing how organisms changed over time.
So he's looking back in time.
Yes, peering into the past.
And he also studied the geographic distribution of species, noticing that isolated islands like the Galapagos often had unique species found nowhere else.
Right. Think about those finches again.
And finches keep coming back.
They're a great example. This suggested that isolation could lead to the evolution of new species.
So it's like each island was a separate evolutionary experiment.
In a way, yes.
It's amazing how he connected seemingly unrelated observations to build his theory.
He was a master at synthesizing information.
But Darwin didn't have access to DNA analysis or modern technology.
Sure.
How did he convince people that such vastly different creatures could be related?
One of his strongest arguments came from the study of homology,
Homology.
which looks at similarities in the underlying structures of different species.
Okay, so what's an example of that?
Think about the bones in the human arm,
Okay.
the flipper of a whale,
Okay.
and the wing of a bat. They all have very different functions, but the arrangement of the bones is strikingly similar.
Wow.
This suggests a common ancestor whose basic limb structure was modified over time to suit different lifestyles.
So it's like a blueprint passed down through generations with variations emerging over time.
Exactly, a common theme in evolution.
Did Darwin have an answer for how these variations actually arise?
Well, he didn't have the complete picture, of course.
Okay.
He knew that offspring inherited traits from their parents, but the mechanisms of heredity were still a mystery in his time.
Right.
But his theory laid the groundwork for later discoveries in genetics, which provided the missing pieces of the puzzle.
So he set the stage.
He did.
Well, that's a great place to pause for now.
Okay.
We've covered a lot of ground already,
We have.
from natural selection and the struggle for existence to the fascinating idea of the tree of life.
A lot to think about.
We'll be back soon to delve further into Darwin's world and the lasting impact of On the Origin of Species. Welcome back to our deep dive into Darwin's On the Origin of Species.
It's great to be back.
We've been exploring how Darwin built his case for evolution by natural selection from those Galapagos finches
Right.
to the amazing concept of the tree of life.
It's a fascinating journey.
It is. Now let's dig into some of the evidence he used to support his radical ideas.
Okay, sounds good.
One of the things that makes On the Origin of Species so compelling is that Darwin didn't shy away from the tough questions.
Yeah, he really tackled those head on.
Like the age of the Earth, the geographic distribution of species, even those seemingly useless body parts we call vestigial structures.
Right, those anatomical mysteries.
Okay, let's start with the age of the Earth.
Okay.
Did Darwin have any evidence to support his idea that evolution required vast stretches of time?
He drew heavily on the work of geologists like Charles Lyell,
Go.
who argued that the Earth was far older than previously thought, millions of years old instead of just a few thousand.
Wow, that's a big difference.
It is. This immense timescale was crucial for Darwin's theory, allowing for those gradual changes to accumulate over generations.
It's like needing a really long canvas to paint a truly epic masterpiece.
Exactly. A lot of time for those brushstrokes.
But how did Darwin connect this ancient Earth to the evolution of species?
Well, he turned to the fossil record,
Ah, fossils.
which provides snapshots of life in different geological eras. Fossils showed a progression from simpler to more complex life forms over time, supporting the idea that species evolved gradually.
So it's like finding a series of sketches, each one slightly more detailed than the last leading up to the finished painting.
A great analogy.
It's amazing how Darwin pieced together this evidence from different fields to create a comprehensive picture.
He was a master of synthesis.
He also found compelling evidence in biogeography,
Biogeography.
the study of how species are distributed around the world.
Yes, looking at the patterns of life across the globe.
He noticed that isolated islands like the Galapagos often had unique species that weren't found anywhere else.
All right, think about those finches again.
The finches always come back.
They're a great example.
But why would isolation lead to new species?
Well, think of it this way. A small group of animals gets separated from the mainland, maybe by a storm or rising sea level. They find themselves in a new environment with different challenges and opportunities. Over time, natural selection favors traits that help them survive in this new setting.
So they're adapting to their unique island environment, and eventually they become so different from their mainland relatives that they're a whole new species.
Precisely. And this pattern repeats itself across the globe. Take Australian marsupials, for example. They evolved separately from placental mammals because Australia was isolated for millions of years, leading to a whole unique branch of the mammal family tree.
It's like each continent is a separate evolutionary laboratory cooking up its own unique blend of life.
A great way to put it, Darwin's theory really helps explain these global patterns of biodiversity.
But what about those vestigial structures you mentioned? You know, those seemingly useless body parts that make us wonder what nature was thinking.
Ah, yes, the anatomical leftovers. The human appendix is a classic example. It's a small pouch attached to the large intestine, and it doesn't seem to do much in modern humans.
So should we just get our appendixes removed? What's Darwin's take on that?
Well, Darwin argued that vestigial structures are remnants of features that were functional in ancestral species. The appendix is thought to be a leftover from a larger organ used for digesting plant matter in our distant ancestors.
So it's like a relic from our evolutionary past, a reminder that our bodies are a product of millions of years of adaptation. I guess nature doesn't always clean up after itself perfectly.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And there are countless other examples in the animal kingdom. Whales have tiny pelvic bones even though they don't have legs. This suggests they descended from land mammals that did have legs.
It's fascinating to think about how our bodies carry these echoes of our evolutionary history. Are there any other types of evidence that Darwin used to support his theory?
He also pointed to artificial selection, which we touched on earlier with pigeon breeding. Humans have been shaping the evolution of plants and animals for millennia through selective breeding long before we understood the mechanisms at play.
Right, we talked about how pigeon fanciers created all those fancy breeds from the common rock pigeon, but how did this relate to natural selection?
Darwin argued that if humans could achieve such dramatic changes in organisms over relatively short periods, imagine what nature could accomplish over millions of years with the pressure to survive and reproduce as the driving force.
So by observing how humans intentionally shaped species through breeding, Darwin was able to gain insights into how nature might do the same, just on a much grander scale.
Exactly. It highlighted the power of selection, whether driven by human preferences or the relentless challenges of the natural world.
And it wasn't just pigeons. Darwin also pointed to the dramatic transformation of crops like wheat and corn from their wild ancestors through selective breeding.
Precisely. This shows that evolution isn't some abstract concept confined to the distant past. It's an ongoing process, influenced by both natural forces and human actions. We've been shaping the evolution of species for millennia, even before we fully understood what we were doing.
It makes you wonder what Darwin would think about the advances in genetic engineering today. We're now able to directly manipulate genes, essentially taking artificial selection to a whole new level.
It's a fascinating thought experiment. Darwin was a meticulous observer, always curious about the natural world. I think he'd be intrigued by how we're continuing to unravel the mysteries of evolution and the potential we have to influence its course. But he'd probably also caution us to proceed with careful consideration of the long-term consequences. After all, he dedicated his life to understanding the delicate balance of nature and the power of natural selection.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this part of our deep dive. We've seen how Darwin used evidence from geology fossils, biogeography, vestigial structures, and even artificial selection to build his case for evolution. Welcome back to our deep dive into Darwin's On the Origin of Species. We've been on quite a journey, haven't we?
We have, from finches to fossils. It's been fascinating.
We've journeyed through his meticulous observations, from those Galapagos finches to the grand concept of the tree of life.
Right, tracing the branches of life all the way back.
But Darwin's work wasn't just about science.
No, it wasn't.
It was about shaking up how we saw ourselves and our place in the world.
It really challenged the prevailing worldview.
Talk about a controversial idea. Darwin must have known he was stepping into a minefield.
He did, in fact. He even addressed the potential for controversy in the book itself.
Really?
Acknowledging that his views would challenge long-held beliefs.
I can imagine.
He knew it would ruffle some feathers.
He knew it would cause an uproar.
Yes, but despite the uproar on the origin of species, became a cornerstone of modern biology.
Wow, and what's truly remarkable is how well his core ideas have held up over time.
They really have. The foundation he laid was solid.
So he got a lot right, even without all the tools we have today.
He did later discoveries in genetics and molecular biology, actually provided the mechanisms for inheritance and variation.
Oh, wow.
that Darwin himself couldn't fully explain.
So they kind of filled in the gaps.
Exactly. It's like he laid the foundation, and later scientists came along and built upon it, adding new levels to our understanding of evolution.
It's a testament to how powerful his observations and reasoning were.
Absolutely a brilliant mind.
But how has Darwin's work influenced fields beyond just biology?
Well, his ideas have had a profound impact on our understanding of everything from medicine to ecology.
Okay, how so?
Well, think about antibiotic resistance.
Okay.
Bacteria evolve over time to survive in the presence of antibiotics, a classic example of natural selection in action.
Right, survival of the fittest.
Exactly. And our understanding of how bacteria evolve helps us develop strategies to combat antibiotic resistance.
So we're using his ideas to fight disease.
The development of new vaccines and treatments also relies heavily on evolutionary principles.
Oh, interesting.
By understanding how viruses and bacteria evolve, we can better predict how they might change in the future
So we can stay one step ahead.
and design more effective interventions.
It's amazing to think that a book published over 150 years ago is still so relevant to modern medicine and public health.
It speaks to the enduring power of Darwin's insights.
It really does.
His work goes beyond specific applications.
Okay. In what way?
It's fundamentally changed how we think about life on Earth. It has shifted us from a static view of the world to a dynamic one.
Right. So things are always changing.
Exactly. Recognizing that change and adaptation are the norm, not the exception.
It's like realizing that the world isn't a still life painting, but a constantly evolving masterpiece.
A beautiful analogy.
But where do we go from here?
That's the big question, isn't it?
If Darwin were alive today, what would he be most fascinated by in the world of evolutionary biology?
Ooh, that's a tough one. But I think he'd be absolutely thrilled by the advances in genetics and genomics.
The ability to look at DNA.
Yes. Imagine being able to map entire genomes and trace evolutionary relationships between species with incredible precision.
It's mind-blowing.
She'd likely be captivated by the study of epigenetics too, how environmental factors can influence gene expression and even be passed down through generations.
Wow. So it's not just about the genes themselves.
It's about how they interact with the environment, a whole new layer of complexity.
It sounds like we're still just scratching the surface of understanding evolution.
We are. There's so much more to discover.
And I have no doubt that Darwin would be right there with us, meticulously observing, questioning, and revising our understanding of life's grand tapestry.
Always pushing the boundaries of knowledge.
Well, on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive into On the Origin of Species.
It's been a fascinating journey.
It's a book that continues to inspire and challenge us, reminding us of the power of observation, critical thinking, and the interconnectedness of all life.
And the never-ending quest to understand our place in this vast, evolving world.
Thank you for joining us on this exploration of Darwin's groundbreaking work. Keep asking questions, keep exploring, and never lose your sense of wonder about the natural world.
Until next time.